Hello, everyone. Welcome to Say It.
Hey everyone, so happy you are here with us today. I am Mike.
And I am Sarah. Really happy you are with us today.
Sarah, before we start, can I ask you something personal?
That depends on the question.
If you could go back and change one decision in your life, just one, what would it be?
That is a big question for the start of an episode.
It is, but it's also exactly where today's topic lives.
You are right, and the answer, whatever it is, almost always starts with the same words. I would have, or it would have been.
And those words, would have and would have been, are what almost every learner gets wrong.
I was reading an article this week written by a non-native English speaker, and two sentences in the same paragraph stopped me completely.
What did they say?
The first, I would have called you, but I lost my phone.
I would have called you.
The second, if I would have studied harder, I would have passed my exam.
Both sound almost right, but both have something wrong inside them.
And by the end of this episode, you will know exactly what, and you will never make these mistakes again.
But before we start, please like and subscribe to Say It. Every new like and subscriber motivates us to prepare more episodes for you.
Now, let's get into it.
So, would have and would have been.
Two structures used every single day and constantly misformed.
And both connected to that question I asked you at the start.
Exactly. If you could go back and change one decision, the moment you start answering that, would have and would have been are the words you reach for.
Because they live in the past.
But not just any past, a very specific kind of past.
Which kind?
An imaginary past, a past that did not happen.
A past that did not happen.
Every single time you use would have or would have been, you are describing something that did not occur, an alternative version of the past, a different universe where things went differently.
Show me.
I would have called you. What does that tell us?
That you did not call.
Exactly. In the real past, no call. In the imaginary past, there would have been one.
She would have been a doctor.
She is not a doctor. In the real world, no. In the imaginary past, yes.
We would have arrived on time.
We did not arrive on time, but in a different past, we would have.
So every time you hear would have, something did not happen.
Every single time. And that one idea, imaginary past, something that did not happen, sits underneath every use of both structures.
So before we even look at grammar, we just need to hold that idea.
Just that. Would have and would have been. Both imaginary, both describing a past that did not happen.
Now, the difference between them.
One rule. Simple. If something would have happened, an action, an event, would have plus an action verb.
She would have passed the exam. Passing, an action.
If something would have existed, a state, an identity, a quality, would have been.
She would have been a doctor. Being a doctor, a state.
Same imaginary past, different kind of thing inside it. Action or state. That is the only difference.
Would have, something that would have happened. Would have been, something that would have existed.
And both in a past that never was.
Would have and would have been, both imaginary, both in a past that did not happen.
Remember that, and the rest of this episode will make complete sense.
So let us start with the first one, would have.
Would have plus the past participle of any action verb, something that would have happened in an imaginary past.
The structure first. Would have, then what?
Then the past participle, called, passed, arrived, known, done.
I would have called.
Called, past participle of call, action, would have.
She would have passed the exam.
Passed, past participle of pass, action, would have.
They would have arrived earlier.
Arrived, past participle of arrive, action, would have. Every time.
And this structure almost always appears inside a conditional sentence.
Yes, the third conditional. And this is where would have does most of its work. If plus had plus past participle, then would have plus past participle.
If I had studied harder, I would have passed.
If she had left earlier, she would have arrived on time.
If they had tried harder, they would have won.
Every single one, a condition in the past that did not happen, and an imaginary result that also did not happen.
Now, there is something fascinating about these sentences.
What is that?
There's a secret message inside each sentence, 2 hidden facts, both negative.
Show me.
If I had studied harder, I would have passed. What are the 2 hidden facts?
Hidden fact 1, I did not study harder. Hidden fact 2, I did not pass.
Both facts, both negative, both hiding inside the grammar.
If she had left earlier, she would have arrived on time.
She did not leave earlier. She did not arrive on time.
If they had tried harder, they would have won.
They did not try harder. They did not win.
Every third conditional sentence is 2 facts in disguise. And once you see that, you can decode any sentence like this that you ever encounter.
That is actually very useful.
It is. And one more thing, the order of the clauses is flexible.
What do you mean?
If I had known, I would have called. That is one order. Condition first, then result. But you can also say, I would have called if I had known.
Result first, then the condition.
Both correct, both equally natural. The meaning is identical.
And when the if clause comes first, comma between the 2 parts.
Always. If I had known, comma, I would have called. But when the result comes first, no comma needed. I would have called if I had known.
Would have plus past participle, third conditional, and every if I had sentence, 2 hidden negative facts inside it.
That is would have doing its core work. Now, before we go any further, that first sentence from the article.
I would have called you, but I lost my phone.
Would have. Let us deal with this properly.
What is wrong with it?
Would have does not exist. There is no such thing as would have in English, not in any context. Never.
But it sounds so natural.
It sounds natural because of pronunciation. In fast, natural speech, would have contracts to would have. The sound at the end, of, sounds exactly like the word of.
So learners hear would have and write would of.
Every time. And the same happens with should have, could have, might have. All of them always wrong. Always should have, could have, might have, would have.
And the contraction itself, would have, that is fine?
Completely fine in informal speech and casual writing. I would have called you. Natural and correct. Just never write would have.
Would have, always wrong. Would have, fine. And would have works without an if clause. The reason comes after but or in the next sentence. Now, the second sentence from the article.
If I would have studied harder, I would have passed my exam.
Let us apply what we know. 2 clauses. The if clause, if I would have studied. The main clause, I would have.
And the problem is in the if clause.
Would have is in the if clause.
And that is the trap. Would have never goes in the if clause. Never. Not once, not in any third conditional sentence.
Never?
Never. The if clause has one job and one form. Had plus past participle. That is it.
So, if I would have studied, wrong. If I had studied, right.
Always. Would have belongs only in the main clause, the result, never in the condition.
So the 2 parts of the sentence have completely different structures.
Always. If clause, had plus past participle. Main clause, would have plus past participle. They never swap. They never match.
Let me try a few.
Go ahead.
If I would have known, wrong. If I had known, right.
Perfect.
If she would have studied, wrong. If she had studied, right.
Exactly right.
If they would have left earlier, wrong. If they had left earlier, right.
Every time.
If I would have been there, wrong. If I had been there, right.
Correct. And notice all 4 corrections use had, not would have. Just had plus past participle.
Why do so many people put would have in the if clause?
Because both clauses feel like they should match. The main clause has would have, so learners symmetricize. They put would have in the if clause too, but English does not work that way.
The if clause always looks further back into the past.
Exactly. Had, simple, clean, further back. Would have, the imaginary result that follows from it.
And in fast speech, something interesting happens.
Yes, if I had known contracts to if I'd known, and I'd sounds identical, whether it means I had or I would.
So how do you know which one it is?
Position. I'd in the if clause always means I had. I'd in the main clause always means I would. The position tells you every time.
If I'd known, I had. I'd have called, I would.
Always. And one honest note, in casual American English, if I would have is extremely common, even among educated native speakers.
So learners hear it constantly.
Which is exactly why it feels right. But every major grammar authority considers it non-standard. In formal writing, always if I had. Always.
Would never goes in the if clause. If clause, had plus past participle. Main clause, would have plus past participle. Always.
That is the rule, and once you know it, you will hear the error everywhere. Now let's discuss would have been.
Would have been. Same structure as would have, but the main verb is be.
Exactly. Been is simply the past participle of be. So just as would have called means calling would have happened, would have been means being something would have existed.
A state, an identity, a quality.
Or a location, something that would have existed in a different past, not something that would have happened, something that would have been true.
Show me the difference.
She would have passed the exam. Passing, an action, would have.
She would have been happy. Being happy, a state, would have been.
Same imaginary past, same structure, only the verb changes. And that one verb change from an action verb to be shifts the meaning entirely.
From something that would have happened to something that would have existed.
Always. Now, would have been plus an adjective, describing an emotional state or quality that would have existed.
She would have been happier.
Happy, adjective, state, would have been.
I would have been exhausted.
Exhausted, adjective, state, would have been.
He would have been so angry.
Angry, adjective, would have been, every time.
She would have been disappointed.
All of them states that would have existed in a different past. Now, would have been plus a noun, describing an identity or role that would have existed.
I would have been a lawyer.
Lawyer, noun, identity, would have been.
She would have been a teacher.
Teacher, noun, identity, would have been.
He would have been the manager.
The manager, noun, role, would have been.
They would have been great friends.
Great friends, noun phrase, would have been, every time.
And location?
They would have been here already. We would have been in Paris by now. She would have been at the meeting.
Not an action, not a state exactly, just a place they would have been.
And all of it would have been, because being somewhere is not an action. It is a condition of existence.
Now, this structure comes up a lot in sympathy, in imagining what someone's life could have been.
One of the most moving uses of would have been. She would have been so proud of you. You would have been amazing at that job. He would have been a wonderful father.
All imaginary, all describing something that would have existed but never did.
And that is exactly what makes these sentences so powerful. They carry the weight of a life unlived.
Would have been plus adjective, a state that would have existed. Would have been plus noun, an identity that would have existed. Would have been plus location, a place they would have been.
All imaginary, all in a past that did not happen.
Now, would have been has two more uses, and both of them look identical on the surface.
Same words, would have been, but what comes after them is completely different, and that difference changes the meaning entirely.
How do you tell them apart?
One question, what is the word that comes immediately after would have been?
Just one word tells you everything?
Every time, and we will get to that, but first, the second use, would have been in the passive voice.
Passive voice?
Yes, in a normal sentence, the subject does the action. She promoted him. But in passive voice, the subject receives the action. He was promoted. Something happened to him.
And in an imaginary past,
Would have been plus the past participle. The subject would have received the action but did not.
show me.
The project would have been completed on time.
Completed, past participle. Something would have been done to the project.
She would have been promoted last year.
Promoted, past participle. Something would have happened to her career.
The meeting would have been canceled.
Canceled, past participle.
He would have been given the award.
Given, past participle. Irregular but still a past participle.
Every single one. Would have been plus a past participle. The subject receives the action in an imaginary past.
And how do I recognize the past participle?
It usually ends in ed, completed, canceled, promoted, or it is an irregular past participle, given, chosen, fired, told, sent.
So if the word after would have been ends in ed or is an irregular past participle, that is layer 2, passive.
Exactly. Now, contrast with layer 1. She would have been happy. Happy, adjective. Layer 1, state. She would have been promoted. Promoted, past participle. Layer 2, passive.
Same words, completely different meaning. The word after would have been tells you which one.
Always. Now, the third use. Would have been in the continuous form.
Continuous?
Yes, describing an action that would have been in progress, ongoing, at a specific moment in the imaginary past. Not something that would have happened and finished, something that would have been happening.
What does that look like?
Would have been plus verb ing, the ing form.
She would have been waiting for hours by the time we arrived.
Waiting, ing form, an ongoing action in the imaginary past, still in progress at that moment in the imaginary past.
He would have been sitting in that chair if he had come.
Sitting, ing form, ongoing, in progress.
They would have been living in Paris by now.
Living, ing form, a life in progress, in a different past.
If she had not got the job in London, she would have been working in Paris.
Working, ing form, an ongoing situation that would have been her reality.
So the continuous adds a sense of duration, something.
Exactly. Now, contrast with layer 1. She would have been happy. Happy, adjective. Layer 1, state. She would have been promoted. Promoted, past participle. Layer 2, passive.
Same words, completely different meaning. The word after would have been tells you which one.
Always. Now, the third use. Would have been in the continuous form.
Continuous?
Yes, describing an action that would have been in progress, ongoing, at a specific moment in the imaginary past. Not something that would have happened and finished, something that would have been happening.
What does that look like?
Would have been plus verb ing, the ing form.
She would have been waiting for hours by the time we arrived.
Waiting, ing form, an ongoing action in the imaginary past, still in progress at that moment in the imaginary past.
He would have been sitting in that chair if he had come.
Sitting, ing form, ongoing, in progress.
They would have been living in Paris by now.
Living, ing form, a life in progress, in a different past.
If she had not got the job in London, she would have been working in Paris.
Working, ing form, an ongoing situation that would have been her reality.
So the continuous adds a sense of duration, something still happening at that moment in the imaginary past.
Exactly. Not a completed action, not a state, an action in progress, ongoing, unfinished at that point in time.
And contrast with layer 2, the report would have been finished. Finished, past participle. Layer 2, passive.
She would have been finishing the report. Finishing, ing form. Layer 3, continuous. Same subject, completely different meaning.
Finished means it would have been done. Finishing means she would have been in the middle of doing it.
Perfect. Now, the diagnostic rule. The one question that tells you which layer you are looking at every single time.
What comes after would have been?
Exactly. 3 possibilities, 3 answers.
Adjective or noun, layer 1, state or identity.
Past participle ending in ed or irregular form, layer 2, passive, something done to the subject.
Verb ing, layer 3, continuous, an action in progress.
1 question, 3 answers. The word after would have been tells you everything.
She would have been happy. Happy, adjective, layer 1.
She would have been promoted. Promoted, past participle, layer 2.
She would have been finishing. Finishing, ing, layer 3.
Same subject, same structure, 3 completely different meanings, and the only thing that changes is the word that comes after would have been.
That is the most useful thing anyone has ever told me about this structure.
Then we are doing our job. Now, one more distinction, and this one catches even advanced learners.
Which one?
When do you use would have been, and when do you use would be?
Are they not the same thing?
They feel the same, but they are not. And the difference comes down to time.
Time?
One simple question. Is the result happening now, or did it happen in the past?
The result of the imaginary condition.
Exactly. If the result is in the present, right now, today, at this moment, you do not use would have. You use would be.
No have at all.
No have, because would have lives in the past. Would be lives in the present.
Show me.
If I had studied medicine, I would be a doctor now.
Now, present, would be.
If I had studied medicine, I would have become a doctor.
Know now, past result, would have.
Same condition, same imaginary past, but the result lands at a different time, and that changes everything.
Another one.
If she had taken that job, she would be living in London today.
Today, present, would be.
If she had taken that job, she would have moved to London.
Know today, past result, would have. If we had left earlier, we would be there by now.
By now, present, would be.
If we had left earlier, we would have arrived hours ago.
Hours ago, past, would have.
So the time word is the signal.
Always. Now, today, right now, at this moment, by now, any of these in the result clause would be, no have.
And if there is no time word and the result is clearly in the past,
Would have or would have been.
and the most common error,
If I had saved my money, I would have been rich now.
now is there, present result.
So it should be, I would be rich now, not would have been.
The now pulls the result into the present, and would have cannot reach the present.
Exactly. Would have stays in the past. The moment you see now or today, let go of have. Just would be.
Now in the sentence, would be, past result, would have. The time word tells you everything.
Every single time.
Now, 3 companions to would have that every learner needs.
3 structures that travel alongside would have and would have been in real conversation, starting with the negative form.
Wouldn't have.
Yes, describing what would not have happened in a different past, and one of its most powerful uses, reassurance.
Reassurance.
Yes. When someone is worried about how something would have turned out, wouldn't have tells them the feared outcome would never have happened.
Don't worry, she wouldn't have been angry.
She would not have felt that way, even in the imaginary past.
Even if he had found out, he wouldn't have told anyone.
He would not have. The feared outcome, gone.
They wouldn't have minded.
Not at all. And one more use, expressing surprise at someone's behavior.
I wouldn't have said that.
Meaning, I am surprised someone said that. I would never say that myself.
She wouldn't have been so rude.
Meaning, that behavior surprises me. It is out of character.
Wouldn't have. What would not have happened, and one of the most comforting things you can say to someone going through regret.
Always. Now, should have and would have. These two almost always travel together in natural conversation.
How so?
Should have names the right choice, the thing that should have been done. Would have names the result, what would have happened if that choice had been made.
You should have applied. You would have gotten it.
Should have, the right choice. Would have, the imaginary result.
She should have left earlier. She would have arrived on time.
Same pattern, right choice, then result.
I should have listened. I would have avoided all of this.
Should have and would have. Always together, always in that order.
And the third companion, I wish.
I wish plus past perfect, the most direct way to express regret about the past.
Structure, I wish plus subject plus had plus past participle.
I wish I had studied harder. I did not study and I regret it now.
I wish I had called you. I did not call and I am sorry.
I wish we had saved more money.
I wish she had not left.
And the natural pairing, I wish for the regret, would have for the imaginary result.
I wish I had gone. I would have loved it.
I wish she had applied. She would have gotten the job.
I wish I had known. I would have helped.
Two sentences, two structures working together. The wish names what did not happen. Would have names what the result would have been.
And there is one very common error with I wish.
I wish I would have gone.
That sounds natural.
It does, but it is always wrong. After wish, always had, never would have.
I wish I would have gone, wrong. I wish I had gone, right.
The would have comes in the next sentence describing the imaginary result, not inside the wish itself.
I wish I had gone. I would have loved it. Two sentences, two structures, never mixed into one.
And one more, if only. The same grammar as I wish, but stronger, more emotional.
If only I had studied harder.
Same grammar as I wish I had studied harder, but more intense, more longing.
If only we had left earlier.
If only she had not said that.
Same had plus past participle, just a stronger feeling behind it.
Wouldn't have, the feared outcome that would never have happened. Should have, then would have, the right choice and its imaginary result. I wish plus had, the regret. Would have, what the result would have been. And never, I wish I would have.
Three companions all traveling alongside would have in real conversation.
Now let us talk about the mistakes, the exact sentences that go wrong most often.
And we have already solved two of them during the episode.
We have 4 mistakes, fast and clean.
Starting with the first one, from the article at the very beginning.
I would have called you.
Would of does not exist. The of sound in would have is have, not of.
Always would have, or the contraction would have. Never would of, in any context, ever.
Mistake number 2, also from the article.
If I would have studied harder, I would have passed.
Would in the if clause, and would never goes in the if clause.
If clause, had plus past participle. Always. If I had studied harder, I would have passed.
Would stays in the main clause, had stays in the if clause. They never swap.
Mistake number 3.
If she had studied, she would have been passed the exam.
Pass is an action verb, not a state. Would have been is for states and identities and passive voice, not for a simple action verb like pass.
So would have been passed, wrong.
Would have passed, right. The action of passing. Would have plus past participle. No being needed.
Would have been is for adjectives. She would have been happy. For nouns, she would have been a doctor. For passive, she would have been promoted, not for a simple action verb standing alone.
Exactly. If the verb is an action, would have. If the state or identity would have existed, would have been.
And mistake number 4.
If I had saved my money, I would have been rich now.
Now is there.
Now signals a present result, and would have cannot reach the present. The moment you see now or today in the result clause, let go of have.
I would be rich now, not I would have been rich now.
Would be for the present, would have for the past. The time word tells you every time.
4 mistakes, 4 fixes.
Would of, always wrong. Would have or would have, always right.
Would in the if clause, always wrong. Had in the if clause, always right.
Would have been plus simple action verb, wrong. Would have plus action verb, right.
Would have been plus now, wrong. Would be plus now, right.
And 3 questions that solve almost everything.
Is something that would have happened, action verb, would have plus past participle.
Is something that would have existed, state or identity, would have been.
Is there a time word like now or today? Present result, would be, no have needed.
And 3 questions. That is all you need. Now it's time to hear everything working together in a real conversation.
Role play time.
The scenario: 2 old colleagues catching up over coffee. They worked together at the same company 3 years ago. One of them, Mike, almost applied for a significant promotion back then, but decided not to. They are reflecting on that decision and what might have been.
Let us go.
It is so good to see you. It has been too long.
I know, 3 years goes fast.
It really does. Are you still at the same company?
No, I left about a year ago. Started something of my own, actually.
Really? That is wonderful. How is it going?
Better than I expected, honestly. Though I sometimes think about that promotion I did not go for, back when we were both there.
The regional director role?
That one. If I had applied, I think I would have gotten it.
I think so too. You would have been perfect for it.
And my whole career would have been so different.
It would have. Though, honestly, the person they hired would not have been as good as you.
You are very kind.
I mean it. She would have been promoted much earlier if she had stayed.
Maybe, but I do not regret it. If I had stayed, I would not have started my own thing.
Which is exactly where you should be.
I wish I had told you I was thinking about leaving. I would have loved your advice at the time.
I wish you had too. I would have helped.
I know you would have. Anyway, how about you? Still at the same place?
I am, though this time last year, I was close to leaving too.
What stopped you?
An offer fell through. If it had gone ahead, I would have been working in a completely different city by now.
Really? Which city?
Amsterdam. The role would have been based there permanently.
That would have been incredible.
It would have, but it didn't happen, and I've stopped thinking about what would have been.
Coulda, woulda, shoulda.
Exactly. Coulda, woulda, shoulda.
Let us pause there.
Did you notice how naturally would have and would have been came up in that conversation?
Let us pick out a few. I said, if I had applied, I think I would have gotten it.
Would have plus action verb gotten, something that would have happened, the action of getting the promotion in an imaginary past.
And you would have been perfect for it.
Would have been plus adjective perfect, layer 1 again, the state of being perfect in an imaginary past.
And my whole career would have been so different.
Would have been plus adjective different, layer 1 again, the state of being different in an imaginary past.
And I would have been working in a completely different city by now.
Would have been plus ing, working. Layer 3, the continuous, an ongoing situation that would have been in progress, by now signals the present dimension, but the whole condition is imaginary, a life that would have been happening.
And I wish I had told you. I would have loved your advice.
I wish plus had, the regret. Would have plus action verb, loved, the imaginary result. Two separate structures working together exactly as we taught.
And then at the very end, coulda, woulda, shoulda.
Which brings us perfectly to where we are going next.
And in that whole conversation, did it feel like grammar?
Not at all. It felt like two old friends catching up over coffee.
Because that is exactly what it was. Once these structures become natural, you stop choosing them consciously. They just come out.
And every single time, an imaginary past, something that did not happen.
Every single time. And that is exactly what today was about. Learning to live in the imaginary past and say it correctly.
So let us lock it all in fast.
Would have and would have been both live in an imaginary past, a past that did not happen.
Would have plus action verb, something that would have happened. I would have called. She would have passed. They would have arrived.
Would have been plus adjective or noun, layer 1, a state or identity that would have existed. She would have been happy. He would have been a doctor.
Would have been plus past participle, layer 2, passive, something that would have been done to the subject. She would have been promoted. The project would have been completed.
Would have been plus verb ing, layer 3, continuous, an action that would have been in progress. She would have been waiting. They would have been living in Paris.
The diagnostic rule, the word after would have been tells you everything. Adjective or noun, layer 1. Past participle, layer 2. Verb ing, layer 3.
Would never goes in the if clause. If clause, had plus past participle. If I had known, if she had studied. Always had, never would have.
Time word test. Now or today in the result clause, would be, no have. Past result, would have.
Would of, always wrong. Always would have or would have.
I wish plus had, the regret. Would have, the imaginary result. And never, I wish I would have.
Now that expression at the end of the role play.
Coulda, woulda, shoulda.
What does it actually mean?
It means stop thinking about what could have, would have, or should have happened. It did not happen. Accept it. Move forward.
So English has an entire idiom telling you to stop using the structures we just taught you.
Which tells you how deeply these structures live inside the language and inside us.
Learn them properly first, then let them go.
Now your challenge.
Think about your own life. If you had started learning English earlier, how would your life have been different?
Write your answer in the comments. Use would have or would have been. One sentence, your real life, your real answer.
We read every single one.
And if this episode helped you, please share it with one person who is learning English right now.
And subscribe to Say It so you never miss a new episode.
Next episode, much, many, and a lot of. 3 words every learner uses every single day, and almost everyone is choosing the wrong one at the wrong moment.
I mixed those up for longer than I would like to admit.
Most people do, so make sure you are subscribed, and we will see you in the next one. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.